The role of Commissioner for Older People is quite new in Northern Ireland and is one of only 2 in Europe. The office was established under the Commissioner for Older People Act 2011, and it followed extensive lobbying by older people for an independent champion who would safeguard and promote the interests of older people. And it was also supported by a wide range of organisations in Northern Ireland, and interestingly by every single member of the Legislative Assembly who was in the chamber at the time when the vote was taken on whether there should or shouldn't be a Commissioner for Older People. So that very strong cross-party support is important, as is also the importance of the engagement of older people. My appointment was then made following a full public appointments process, or open advertisement, but then made also by the Deputy First Minister and the First Minister acting jointly, so there wasn't a wafer between the politicians at a senior level about the importance of the appointment and their choice. And I have to say it is a pleasure and an absolute privilege to be trusted with and hold the role of Commissioner for Older People. And of course, before we go on to any of the detail, those of you who've heard me before, I'll say it again, more of us are living longer and healthier lives than ever before, and that really is very good news. It is the best public health news of the last century. There is no tsunami of care costs coming, and it is inexcusable to describe older people as people who block beds, who take up resources, and who cost us money. It is simply inexcusable, and the research will refute that evidence, and that is the importance of today's event, because we are a richer, a wider, and a better society because of increased longevity. And on the social side, of course, people have more opportunity to learn from each other, to know one another, to share experiences, and to value each other. And older people make incredible contributions across all aspects of our society. They volunteer, as already been referred to, they volunteer in very large numbers. They pay taxes. They look after other older people in their thousands. They provide care to adults, other adults, very often with their own children with learning disabilities. And they make incredible other civic contributions in politics and in community life. And voluntary organisations would be on their knees were it not for the participation and contribution of older people. Yet too often we still hear those negative voices in the media, which are outstripped by the findings of the Life and Time survey. The public has more positive views and attitudes towards ageing very often than we see in the media and amongst policymakers and politicians, talking about older people as a burden and that tsunami of care costs and need, and how can we afford an ageing society. It's almost as though somebody is saying, well, we like older people, but we can't really afford them. And that simply isn't the case. Older people are sick of it. They're sick of it because it's plain wrong, and they're sick of it because it's hurtful. And today is about the importance of research. And again, I've referred to already, this report that I produced called Appreciating Age sets out, for the first time ever for Northern Ireland, it adds up the financial cost of ageing. So how much is the actual cost of health and social care, additional benefits that are accrue to older people? And set that alongside and monetise, that is the financial value of the contribution that older people make. And it is really, really simple on the robust economic evidence. When you set financial cost against financial contribution, over the next 50 years, Northern Ireland will be £25 billion better off. It's irrefutable, and I'm starting to hear that coming through in a lot of public speaking, in a lot of political engagements, and in a lot of voluntary sector organisations' remarks. We are a richer, financially richer society because we're an ageing society. But enough talking about cost. It's time to look at the real value and plan for an ageing society. And for that, policymakers and politicians need robust evidence. But of course, in fact, nobody becomes 80 overnight, do they? We don't wake up and say, do you know, I'm 80 today. I wasn't 79 last year, I wasn't 78 the year before, I wasn't 77 the year before that. Don't wake up and be 80. Policymakers and planners have no excuse. This demographic trend is not new, it's not unknown, and it shouldn't be unplanned for. So whenever we hear somebody saying, we like older people but we can't afford them, there's a tsunami of care costs, I don't know where we're going to find the care workers. Yes, you do, and if you don't, you shouldn't be in your job. We have a great deal that we should be very proud of in all aspects of our society and that we should treasure and protect. And again, the Life and Time survey does talk about attitudes towards health and social care and expectations of health and social care. We do have some excellence and rights in health and social care. We have age-friendly developments. There will be, on the statute books, if the parties stick to their political commitments, legal protection from discrimination on the grounds of age during this programme for government. We have vibrant voluntary and community associations and the right to free association. And we have benefits, universal benefits, including things like free travel for older people. And we must value the good people and the good services that we have, but look at how much more we should be doing, because we are still an ageist society, and too often older people are not included in decision making. They are ignored, they are set aside, patronised, disregarded and ridiculed. And while there is excellence in social care and health, there's not enough of it, and there are too many examples of things going wrong, and there is neither the planning nor the investment required to assist older people effectively so they can be certain that in the event that they become frail or they need support, it will be there at the time they need it, in the quality and the volume that they need it, and that it will be provided without question. Often good residential and nursing home places are in short supply, and there is far too much care that we see that is meeting only what is described as the minimum standard. And that is not acceptable. We need to be aspirational. I don't want to live in a care home that provides the minimum standard, bumps along the bottom. I have yet to meet anybody that does. We have hospitals under considerable pressure, and there are too many cases of scandalous abuse, violence and neglect and degradation of some of the most vulnerable people in our society, and that takes place in every setting. So we should never run away with the idea that it does only happen in hospital care or in nursing homes or in residential homes. It happens everywhere. It happens in people's own homes, it happens with family members as well as with paid care workers, it happens in residential and nursing care and in hospital settings. It happens everywhere. Where older people are vulnerable to abuse, there are people in every sector of society who will exploit and take advantage of that. And when we have media images and articles which continually focus on older people as a cost, a burden, as helpless, as a drain on society, it feeds into those people who would take advantage of vulnerability. And when things go wrong, of course, older people need fast, decisive resolution. Very much and too often we have complaints procedures and legal processes which can run for years. I was talking to a gentleman just last week in a complaints procedure which has run for 14 years. The people directly affected have died. Older people do not have the time and the luxury to wait for resolution of complaints, and we need a much more independent, fast, decisive, no prevarications or cover-up complaints handling processes across all of our public sector. Because right across all of our services and support, older people need certainty. And at the moment, they don't have certainty. There is a view that older people will receive services, but when I listen very carefully, they're not confident or certain that it will be available to them in the form and the function that they want and that they need. And as a Commissioner, I can investigate independently and thoroughly. I can challenge and intervene with statutory agencies, and that is vital in holding to account those public authorities where they fail. And it is also vital that they get credit when they deliver things well. And I can also formally advise government, with government having to have due regard for my advice. And that takes me very clearly to the need for evidence. If I can find my notes again. Within my first corporate plan, which I called Hope, Confidence and Certainty, because older people told me they wanted to be hopeful about older age. They needed to be certain they'd be treated properly. They need to be they want to be confident they'll be treated fairly in their middle years and when they're not frail or vulnerable. But they want to be absolutely certain that in the event that they are frail or vulnerable, need services and support, that unequivocally and without question that support will be there. And research is absolutely critical to the advice I provide to government. I very much welcome, as I said, the work of ARC and the Life and Times survey, because our demographics are changing, and this should be of intense dynamic interest to policymakers and politicians alike. The numbers of older people will rise by over 87% over the next 50 years. This is a huge increase. There'll be 684,000 people aged over 60, something like 33% of our population. So future policies, future planning, what numbers of older people will there be? What are their expectations? What proportion of them will need health and social care services? What should be the kinds of planning for the services and support they need? What kind of attitudinal change do we need to see so that we embrace, value and respect an ageing society? And how do we go about bringing about that change? What opportunities will there be for public and private sector providers to make profits, legitimate profits, to provide high-quality public services, to regulate, inspect and provide the standards and certainty and standards that are required? And also, where are the voices of older people? Is policy being made without hearing the voices and opinions and views of those older people who will be directly affected? And how can good research assist with bringing those voices clearly to policymakers? Because these are all crucial to ensuring that government produces policy and legislation which is fit for purpose and has the needs, the rights, the views and the expectation of today's and tomorrow's older people at their core. In my role as Commissioner, I've been engaged in the process of making robust policy advice to government, and I use advice rather than recommendations because I have a statutory duty to provide advice to government and a right to have that advice given due consideration, which means they can't just put it in a drawer and put it away. And an example of that was the Appreciating Age report here, where I was able to monetise the contribution and the cost of ageing. And you will hear in a lot of government speaking now that very strong contribution focus. And that model was underpinned clearly by strong economic data, robust evidence, and has not been the subject of challenge. And I also carried out a number of roundtable events at which the views of older people added their insight and their experience to this research. I also had a report where I advised government on the need to value and appreciate an ageing workforce, partly based on the rights of older people to work longer, partly on the fact that older people say they feel a need to work longer because of the increase in the state pension age. But at those roundtables, a lot of older people commented that they didn't feel valued by business, they didn't feel valued by government. And if you look at a lot of the promotional literature on employment, what we'll see is we're a young, vibrant, well-qualified economy. We don't hear what good employers say, those employers who value their older workers, that without the retention of older people in the workforce, the economy cannot grow at the speed it needs to. It cannot grow as well it needs, and good employers recognise that older people are valued and valuable employees. They have a lot of experience to share. They are flexible, they are good team players, and they are willing to undertake training and learning, and they are invaluable to the growth of the Northern Ireland economy. So again, a change in attitude needs to be reflected also within a change in government policy and practice to promote the contribution of older people, and it needs to be reflected therefore in the material that comes through, so that we see people not saying that older people should step away from their jobs, but that older people should be able to retire or retain their jobs because they make a valuable contribution. And there is a growing body of research evidence about the capacity of research to inform policy. And more, it's recognised that research not only has the capacity to influence policy at all levels, but also to inform policy right the way through to every stage of its development. And research has a key and very important tool, and that is to find what I would call surprises. Statistics or insights which aren't out there in the general noise around the policy area, which is currently being aired in the media or in the research environment. And researchers are often among the first to notice developments, trends or relationships in statistical data. And I would highlight the question of crime clearance as one of the reports that I published, where we have seen the influence of the role of the Commissioner, as well as the valuable contribution of older people's organisations. You will have heard a lot about the fear of crime and the policing and community safety partnerships and older people's organisations, reflecting that very clearly, that there is a substantial fear of crime amongst older people. But of course there is also a reality that while we are a low crime society, there are about 500 serious crimes committed against older people every year. That averages at something like 10 a week. And every one of those has a devastating impact on the individual and a wider impact on the community in which they live. And when I listened to older people who were the victims of crime, what I uncovered very clearly and unpacked the statistics was that the clearance rate for crime is poor. That when somebody commits a crime against an older people, it very rarely results in a prosecution. It very rarely results in the potential offenders being brought before the courts. And I unpicked the statistical evidence very carefully. It took me a long time and a lot of conversations within policing and within statistics. But very clearly, if you're the victim of crime and you're over 60, it's about half as likely to result in a clearance, that is a prosecution or a conviction, than the same crime being committed against somebody under 60. Now, that is inexcusable, unequal treatment. And we now, after, as I say, a lot of engagement with the policing board and the police service and others, have for the first time seen a change to the policing board targets to increase the clearance rate for crime against older people. So the research evidence showing the trends in clearance was very significant in influencing that priority. Other examples of things, practical things like the men's shed movement, started from public health work in Australia, looking at how better to engage men who were experiencing depression in activities that they were interested in and involved with. And certainly men's sheds are now something very widely adopted by older people's organisations, and it can sound like a bit of a gimmick, like a men's MOT health check. But if it is effective engaging men in activities that they want to do, they want to participate in, challenges loneliness and depression, that is very positive. And again, the concept of active ageing, we've heard descriptions of the active ageing strategy for Northern Ireland, which has yet to be published, and I am hopeful that it will be published shortly. But the concept of active ageing will emerge throughout that publication. A positive view about ageing, a positive view about later life, which does emerge from the research evidence about engagement of older people, involvement in civic life, the value of remaining as healthy and as engaged as possible for as long as possible. And while government at the Westminster level has been quick to recognise the impact of changing dynamics on the changes to state pension age and ratchet up the age at which we can all get our state pension, of course it has been slower in many other areas to grasp both the opportunities and the challenges presented by the increasing numbers of older people in our society. Research, of course, is also as an evidence tool to say very simply how to add value to policy. What works elsewhere? We are a small place, 1.7 million people. We haven't got all the answers. We haven't always done everything the best in the entire world or the universe. We have a lot to learn from other countries. And all of the research that I undertake as the Commissioner reflects what happens in Northern Ireland, what happens north and south, what happens east and west, but also what happens on a wider international scale. And a lot to learn. I published yesterday on advice to government in relation to the need for changes to social care legislation in Northern Ireland, including the involvement of what I've described as a preventative visit, or the offer of one, to everybody aged over 75 by a health and social care professional to talk to them about what may be available in the future, what their needs are at this point, if they have given any consideration to what they might need in the future, and to make them aware of what their rights and entitlements are. And that comes from Denmark. So on an international level, looking at those kind of recommendations. And the research that I've carried out is all available on the website of the Commissioner for Older People, but it includes appreciating age, the monetised value of older people's contribution, valuing an ageing workforce. The economy can't grow unless older people are retained in the workforce, and I'm sick of those posters at Belfast City Airport with young people leaping over the stones on the bridge, but they make a massive contribution in employment, and they are valuable and should be valued employees for the contribution they make to the economy. We need to see legislation change on protecting our older people from abuse. We need significant changes on protecting older people from abuse, and it is imperative the government introduces the legislation. We've seen it in other jurisdictions. It is absolutely vital. Tinkering about with policy changes is not enough. We need legislative change. I've also looked at the evidence of regulation and inspection of nursing, residential and domiciliary care. And we need to change the culture of care. And on the evidence, I focused on a report, an independent report, that was produced about a particular nursing home in Northern Ireland, which looked at problems it had had for a number of years. And two little lines in that report. For 8 years, this home failed to meet even the minimum standards. A large number of people don't live as much as 8 years in a nursing home, and therefore will have lived out their lives in a home which doesn't even meet the minimum standards. So some very rapid assessment of the regulatory environment and of the issues raised by that care home resulted in clear advice to government about changes that are required to both the minimum standards, to changing the culture of care, to changes to the penalties that will apply quickly and decisively both to the managers and to the owners and the businesses which run nursing homes, and significantly to improve the rights of older people who live in them. And as I said, published yesterday on the need for adult social care legislation to be overhauled and for new unified legislation. So the 2014 Life and Times survey is part of that research evidence which leaves less wriggle room for policymakers and politicians. The evidence base is clear. It needs to be robust. I think fluffy evidence, which is described as research, which just consolidates and stacks up what we think we already know, is not good enough. We need the kind of robust evidence which, alongside real confident, decisive protection of the rights of older people, is what we need to see. It has revealed significant insights to me through research and through the Life and Times survey about attitudes, and shows, for example, the figures on ageism in the workplace and attitudes towards older people at staying work needs very careful attention and talking very positively about the contribution of older people. But it also shows potential mistreatment of older people in things like buying of financial services, and significantly the proposed legislation for aged goods, facilities and services, which will protect older people from discrimination. There is still an opportunity, I believe, to include financial services in that legislation, and is a very important issue. Some of the most significant increases in the numbers of older people reporting abuse, or where abuse is reported, is in relation to financial exploitation. So I would say it's enlightening to see the research carried out right the way through ARC and the Life and Times survey, and has highlighted a number of emerging issues which will be invaluable to everybody who's concerned with age and ageing, and that should be everybody, and if it's not, they should pick it up very quickly and run with it, because, as I said, it is the most positive public health news of the last century, that more of us are living longer, and the most significant policy opportunity and challenge that we have. Thank you very much.